How's it going, guys? And welcome back to Game of the Week, where I show you the best and worst the DPL has to offer in a given week. Week 2, there's not a huge amount to talk about. There's kind of two main things. One is that it was quite an RNG-filled week, with a lot of blowout series that hacks definitely had an influence in. The other thing is whatever this game is. So when it came to Game of the Week, it was a pretty easy decision when the nominations went out, because there wasn't a whole lot to pick from. And the winner was an obvious game, and I'm glad I'm going to get to cover it. And that is the USUM matchup between Count Riario, back playing Mons for the first time since about 2019, and Theodore Manny, who's back in USUM after quite a while stalling his way through the Swish Gauntlet, returning to USUM because his team also has Glop, and they don't need both of them in the same tier. And on paper, pretty cool matchup, and let's get right. Getting into the matchup here, it's fairly clear that Theo is on the ascendancy. Count's team consists of Megalade, Tapu Fini, Mesprit, Ferrothorn, Alolan Persian, Thundurus Therian, Camerupt, and Zygarde, with Z users of Persian, Thundi, and Zygarde, which I think is the most telling of the new Z point system, in comparison to some of the other teams. Then you look at Theo's team, it's just classic USUM Theo, we just haven't seen it for a while. Z-Torn-T, Scizor, Clefable, Mega Sableye, Tangrowth, Snorlax, Z-Milotic, and Z-Dugtrio. And yeah, on paper, Theo is very much favoured. The Torn-T looks like an absolute bitch here. From even just being Assault Vested to it could just click Fly Z if it wanted to absolutely nuke stuff. And because Count's removal isn't the best because Fini wants to be doing other things than clicking Defog here, it makes it a bit difficult for Thundi to be switching in constantly. And then you look at all of Count's offense and how it loses. Most notably, Megalade doesn't beat Sableye, Zygarde doesn't really beat Tangrowth unless it gets a perfectly timed, special hit, like maybe we see Special, but Clef plus Snorlax shuts that down anyways. And if there is maybe something he could get going with Glade, say he gets through Sableye somehow, he could trap it with Dugtrio, for example. There's maybe something here with Persian, because it has some interesting coverage across the board, but on paper, this does look difficult for Count, and he's really going to have to pull some things out of his bag. Thundi does look like the biggest threat if he's able to get damage off on the Snorlax, and maybe use something like Zygarde to break his way through Tangrowth, but I do think that Theo can just play this nice and slow, and he can even use Scizor as a mid-ground in a lot of problematic situations that he wants to keep Tangrowth away from. Because Tangrowth probably wants to keep its Assault Vest intact. So, wouldn't be too surprising to see Scizor be the pivot choice into mons like Tapu Fini. And I don't really know if the Camerupt can do anything. It very much depends if the Milotic shows up, which kind of is an interesting dynamic there. Milotic probably shouldn't, because into Fini plus Ferrothorn it feels quite shit. So maybe there is an angle that the Camerupt can come and do some surprising things. But it does also run into the Dugtrio problem, so we shall see, I guess. And without further ado, let's hop into the game and see how exactly this madness unfolded. We get into the game here, and we see that Count has opted to bench the Persian and the Ferrothorn. Neither are too surprising. Ferrothorn maybe could have been helpful for something like the Snorlax, but it makes complete utter sense, and Persian is far too passive in this game. Theo's benching decisions are a little bit more interesting, as he opts to leave the Milotic and the Dugtrio at home. Yes, Dougie doesn't directly threaten anything, aside from maybe the Camerupt, which probably was disrespected in prep, but at the same time, it does seem that he's opted more into the bulk rather than the one offensive piece to trap a threat, which could have been Mega Gallade, since Banded EQ does a fair bit of damage. Although, his Mega Gallade matchup is quite nice. So, you do look at this on paper, it still very much favors Theo. And it's going to be a case of what innovative techniques does Count have to capitalize on Theo's bulky habits. And without further ado, let's get into this game. So we see the Sableye lead from Theo, obviously, and we see Tapu Fini lead from Count, because obviously Theo's going to lead Sableye to get the Mega Evolution off as soon as possible. The question is it going to be Fake Out or is it going to be Protect? And we find out it's Fake Out. which makes sense in this case, because you don't want to give Feeney the comp mine turn. We see the lefties on the Feeney. A knockoff here from Count is well timed, getting rid of Tangrowth's Assault Vest, meaning that Thundy looks a lot scarier later on. Because it doesn't even necessarily need a nasty plot, it can just click buttons, and could break its way through Clefable if positioned correctly. Speaking of the Thunders, it comes in hard, taking a knockoff, revealing that it's Z Crystal, because it took nothing. Sludge Wave does 17 to a Snorlax, and he gets on out of there and goes into Zygarde. As Double Edge does 30, meaning that we also see Rocky Helmets. This is quite a fat Zygarde. The double into Camerupt is well timed here on Count's end, because it's quite obvious that Tangrowth is going to be the switch in, because why wouldn't you go into your 1000 Hours Resist? Especially if you are expecting something like a Coil or a Dragon Nets. Because with the fatter set, you would think Coil and potentially Restock, because 1000 Hours is a free enough click, but the Tangrowth coming in does give the Camerupt a swap. Now, you're probably wondering what the Camerupt is doing, but if you saw the title and thumbnail, we all know what this Camerupt is doing. As Theo goes into Snorlax, as we see the Eruption doing 39, and getting the 2-shot on the Lax because this thing wasn't Super Berry, and that makes Count's life far easier, because this is the best bet for dealing with the Thundy, now that the Assault Vest is gone. So the Camerupt's kind of already done its job, although it can come in on the Tangrowth and it can come in on the Scizor and do even more of a job. So this puts Count in a commanding position. Torn comes in because it kind of has to attempt to Z to knock it out, but Count swaps into Mesprit, which takes 60, and instead of risking the Hurricane potentially missing and taking a T-Wave, which could be detrimental because the Thundy would kind of just win, Theo decides not to risk that and goes into his Scizor, as we see the light screen coming out from the Mesprit. Zygarde comes back in, taking a U-turn and getting the Rocky Helmet chip off on the Scizor as Torn comes back in. We see an HP Ice do 37, as the Glare achieves the same thing as we talked about earlier. But it's just the Zygarde that's doing the job rather than the Mesprit. So now we have a paralyzed Torn, Thundy looks terrifying now for Theo, and even Mega Gallade could do quite well, although it would have to be a very specific set to get around Sableye, which I don't exactly know what that entails. The Mesprit comes back in, and the Zygarde we see it's actually Air Slash rather than Hurricane, which makes sense, it's Theo. I don't actually remember the last time I saw Theo run Hurricane on his Torn TE. See a U-turn as the Mega Sableye comes in, and here comes our protagonist once again, taking a Fake Out, which does 11, and now he gets to click the funny Eruption button, which does 74. Foul Play doing 35 in return. And we see that it's not even choiced. We see it just clicks Lava Plume here, so it was likely Charcoal, if I had to guess. Just something to be able to give that fire move a boost. And now the Sableye's dead, and now Gallade is great again. So these first 17 turns have gone fantastically for Count. And we've seen a camera put in the most work it's put in for a hell of a long time, which is really cool to see. The light screen wears off, Theo has to go Torn and click Air Slash, which doesn't kill, as Camerupt gets him rocks, which just puts Theo in an even worse position, limiting the Torn switch-ins and regen capabilities, and if we assume that it's an unaware Clefable, which, let's be real, it's Theo, it's probably an unaware Clefable, everything is getting worn down by rocks. And he's likely going to keep this, which he does, going into Thundy, taking the U-turn. We see the Scizor come in, because this is probably his best bet for dealing with Electrium Z, as we actually see Scarf Double Edge on the Scizor. As, like I said, there's the Electrium Z to get the kill. Scarf Scizor was an interesting bring here, because, as we said, the Thundy matchup isn't exactly amazing, and he could have even gone the physical route to get around something like a Tangrowth or a Snorlax, so this makes sense. It actually might have been physical anyways, that might have been Z Wild Charge, I don't really know. As we see yet another Choice Scarfmon from Theo here, this time the Clefable to pick off the Thundy. And Scarf Clef does kind of throw this matchup into a little bit of a loop, because now the Mega Gallade isn't as good, now the Zygarde, we thought might be able to get up a rest relatively soon, isn't going to be able to get that rest off. And Feeney can always get Scarf tricked later in the game. It's also good to note that this could be something like Scarf Healing Wish, which means he can be a bit more reckless with his 2 regen boys that he has left in the back. So Thundy goes down, and we see the Feeny come in here, probably trying to click knockoff. Moonblast does 31. See the Ice Beam trying to catch the Tangrowth, which doesn't do anywhere near enough damage. Theo swaps out here expecting to knock off and gets it right, as the Tangrowth already lost the Assault Vest back on turn 2. Zygarde comes in as a sack to the Giga Drain, not even Grass Knot, so Sub-Zygarde could have done some stuff. But the precision was only there to get the Mesprit in, and we all know what the intention is for this Mesprit. As the Clef comes in, takes rocks, and of course we see Healing Wish, and what's getting Healing Wished? The Camel, baby. This thing is back as we see yet another Healing Wish, this time from the Clefable, and this is the only way that Theo can get rid of the paralysis, which makes sense, because that's the only way he can win, is having a fast Torn. As we see the Lava Plume. So obviously the Torn's going to come in here, just to get rid of the paralysis, which is huge, does 76. Air Slash is going to 2-shot, Fire Blast misses, unfortunately, for count. Air Slash does pick off our protagonist Camel here. That Fire Blast, if that hit, this would have been a 4-kill Camel game, and this would have been immortal. But, unfortunately, it's only a 2-kill Camel game, but it's still a phenomenal performance from our Camel here, which, like I said, we haven't seen a Camel Erupt do this much work in quite a while, and it's cool to see. We always love a low tier popping the fuck off, especially when it's against the Eostall. So Camel goes down, the Feeny comes in here, trying to wear this thing down. Air Slash does 29, and Ice Beam is going to do a huge 68. Theo needs an Air Slash flinch to keep the game alive, he does not get it, and at this point, Count is in control, because all the Theo is left is the Tangrowth, which is taking way too much from Ice Beam. Giga Drain does pick off the Feeny, but now we get to last one, Mega Gallade, which we don't even know what this Mega Gallade is going to do. See the Poison Jab do 41, as we see Seed Bomb, which does not do enough damage, and one more Poison Jab picks Count up the win in what was a tight affair, but I think the differential flattens Theo. Flatters, not flattens, what am I on about? I think the differential does flatter Theo a little bit here. This was a game that Count was in control of from start to finish. From getting rid of the Assault Vest as early as he did on the Tangrowth, to, getting the Thundy in at the right times, and then getting the Camel in when he needed to, and getting the Eruption 2-shot on the Lax, made this game a hell of a lot easier. You then combine that with the fact that he could use Camerupt to pressure Mega Sableye later. He used Zygarde in a good way to ensure that he could get the para off on the Torn, which made Thundy even scarier. And Thundy then was just able to pick up the kills that it needed to. It forced Theo to reveal Dual Scarfers, which was really nice prep on Theo's end. It was the only way to kind of get around some of the offense that Count had here. Double Scarf was good. And then you saw the Healing Wishes on both sides. Like getting the camera back in to be able to essentially claim another if it could. And then the Healing Wish Clef to make sure the camera didn't do too much. Which the Fire Blast miss did suck. It would have been way cooler if Camel just cleaned up the game, but it is what it is. Count was still in control. Feeny looked like a demon at that point with a non-AV Tangrowth, and Gallade was just able to clean up because Theo couldn't hang on to his Torn at that point because he'd essentially be sacking his Tangrowth for free on a 2-shot. Really, really cool to see Count having a game of this caliber for, one of his first games back in, 6 years? And, it's just cool to have Count back in general. I hope you guys have enjoyed this Week 2 Game of the Week, and hopefully we can portray some other tiers. We've now done Oris and we've done USUM. We're going to get Swish next week? Who knows? The Swish Gauntlet, hasn't really delivered any Game of the Week quality yet, but it's definitely on the verge of booming, and I wouldn't be surprised to see one on your screen anytime soon. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will catch you next week for Week 3, where we'll see what the best the DPL has to offer. Peace.